Time for some coding. Yeah, I know, right? Okay. Look at this. Code. And I promise we are going to actually code. Okay, so right out of the box, what are some of the simplest things you can possibly do with the Zend Framework command, or the ZF command? We can run help. Pretty standard. And we're going to walk through and show a few things. You can say, show me the version of Zend Framework you're using. I don't know why I put it twice. I apparently was very tired. You can also, there's also different things you can ask for, when you're running this. So let's pull up a few. All right. This is probably going to scroll off my screen, and you obviously all know what a help screen looks like, at least I hope you do. This is all the stuff you can do right out of the box. These are those system providers that we skipped on that previous slide at the bottom of that list. I said we're going to talk about them. We're starting to get into that. This is what Zend Tool provides, Zend Tool Project provides right out of the box. Because out of the box, the Zend Tool Project is what is being used. You can change that to use something else, but out of the box, that's what it is. So there's your help. See? I told you that was going to happen. It's CLS and DOS. What else? Oops, sorry. What else do we have here? Okay, show version. There we go. So, notice you have time for a couple sips of coffee. Flexibility over speed. Hey, look at that. We're using Zend Framework version 1.9.7.
That delay, is that typical for Windows, or does Linux perform a little better, or are they both about the same?
It's about the same. I mean, I promised myself I was not going to bash Windows.
Right, go for it.
Windows is not as good as Unix, so you're going to have a little bit. But for the most part, it's just as slow.
Okay.
They chose, again, flexibility over speed to circle back around for speed. I do not know this for a fact. It's complete 100% conjecture and putting words in other people's mouth. But I would venture to say that at some point in internal conversations, the following statement, give or take, was said. Hey, they can wait a few seconds because we're saving them a ton of time. I can't say I would make the same argument.
Speaking of Windows, can this be used on like a Windows 7?
Yes, Zend Framework absolutely can. Yep, absolutely. I will say, and this is a tangent, Microsoft has made tremendous strides in the last year or so to revamp the PHP stack on top of Windows. You can compile PHP now from raw source code and configure it any way you want. The fast CGI module has been rewritten, I think primarily from scratch. Don't quote me on that. It's gotten a lot more stable, a lot faster. There's a lot more support. There's a lot of community buy-in. You'll find a lot of the Zend and Microsoft are playing together a little bit more nice, that type of thing. I still will never, the first thing I did when I started where I'm at is we yanked everything off the Windows boxes. And I don't regret that. And I never will regret that. But it's getting much, much better. So yeah, you should not have, having not done it myself, you should not have any problem running it on 7. I ran it on XP and this is Vista in order to prepare for this demo. And I had no problems with either. I had some Apache issues with Vista, but that's another story. And then we'll look at one more command here, and then we'll move on to some more stuff. So that got just the 1.9. You can also get it with and without the words and that kind of thing. So, anybody care to venture a guess as to why you would care about the version? If you just went through all the lists to install Zend Tool, wouldn't you know? Any guesses?
See if it worked right?
Well, see if it worked right.
You'll make sure your alias is pointing to the right framework.
That'll work, absolutely. As you start writing your own custom providers, you might want certain capabilities to be exposed to only certain versions of the framework. So maybe, just conjecture, the way you write your providers is when you launch Zend Tool, it asks you what version are you wanting to run this against, and you pick it, and then you only have certain capabilities within your providers based on the version you picked. Depends on how complex you want your tooling needs to be. Not how complex you want your needs to be. We want them to be easy. Depends on how complex you end up making your Zend Tool implementation. So that's another reason, or another thing. Okay, so actually make a Zend Framework application.
A quick question.
Sure.
On the version, if you download it and install and all that, that's the only version you have. What you need to worry about
Well, if you only need one version to run one application. And usually the version of Zend Framework is included as a library within the application because the idea is you want to have portability. You should be able to just give this to another server and not have to worry about setting up a bunch of stuff. In our particular case, again, where I work, we churn through throwaway sites so quickly that we can't stay on one version because we would never move to the next one. But we can't move the old ones to the new version because it's not worth rewriting them. They're going to go away in 3 months. But in a 3-month span, you might jump several versions of Zend Framework. So we actually maintain several different versions of Zend Framework on our server, but only one application uses one version at a time. We do not mix versions within an application, nor should you. All kinds of crazy things are going to break loose if you try to do that.
But more than one site is sharing the same
Correct, the same
version
install.
and instance of,
Yeah.
of Zend Framework.
We have a folder at user local Zend. We have Zend Framework 1.6, 1.6.1, 1.7, 1.71, 1.7.12, 1.8, 1.81, 1.9, 9.1, 9.4, 9.7, 1.10. And then we just create symbolic links inside of our library. We have a folder. It's you go to our application. It says library ZF, and then there's a symbolic link that points. So if we know that architecturally not a whole lot changed between 1.6 and 1.6.1, but we want to get, we've done all of our testing and we're comfortable with 1.6.1, all we have to do is just go change the symbolic link of the 1.6 application to point to 1.6.1, and now we got all of our security updates that we wanted. You didn't have to do anything. So that's how we choose to manage our implementation. But again,
Which is probably a little more sophisticated than the beginning.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you're just going to have one version. You're just going to run it, etc. So you're going to want to do probably the manual recommendations. Those slides with what the manual tells you. You download it, follow what the manual says. You will be fine. As you start playing with it more, you're very quickly going to go, well, this doesn't quite do what I flip over to my recommendation slides, and you have ultimate control. All right, I have a file here that I can, little cheat sheets here. Okay, so we are going to change directories because this is where I want to put my websites. So at the moment, I have 2 projects in there. Thought I deleted one of them, but it doesn't matter. Final and test, not a big deal. Okay, I'm running locally. I have PHP installed, and I have Apache Web Server installed. So if I go to localhost in my browser, it's going to pull up a website. And as I start making these projects, we can go to them also. So again, you can imagine if this was on an external server and then you had URLs pointing to it, it's all managed with virtual host directories inside of Apache. After class, I'm more than happy to talk to you about them, but that's an entire 2.5 presentations on all this good stuff. But as you see this, you're like, what the heck is this? This is no more, this is my document read. Where do my websites sit? And where's Apache looking for them? That's all this is. I just happen to have a folder on my desktop called Zend Tool Presentation Sites, and that's where I'm throwing it. So I'm in there.
Quick question, are you doing any rewriting? I know you didn't want to get into the Apache. Are you doing any rewriting in the Apache itself? On URL?
Just the Zend Framework.
Okay.
Just the Zend Framework rewriting, which I can show you a sample of it once we do the app because it'll be there.
Okay.
Out of the box, it comes with like 4 rewrite commands. Basically, the way Zend Framework works is it routes everything. You're supposed to tell Apache to go to your publicly accessible folder, go to that index file. How does it go to that index file? Well, Apache, by default, you tell it directory index, load in index.php, and you tell it to acknowledge, I can't think of the exact word I want to use, the htaccess file. It says, if you're not a fav icon, or you're not a robots text file, or you're an image that I can point you directly to, all other requests should go to index.php, which is going to load the Zend Framework front controller, which is going to load your Zend application. It's going to start going, hey, I'm going to load my my Zend resource, or excuse me, Zend routes, so I know which controllers I'm supposed to talk to, and it's going to take care of that entire dispatch process. We do some other custom stuff because why should I go through the overhead of launching Zend Framework and all that work just to serve off a PDF? Oh, this site happens to have .tiff files. Fine, we'll add another. Oh heck, you know what? Now we have so many entries. Let's just say everything in the media folder doesn't need to get routed. So they're simple enough rewrites, but we do use them. Just there's no sense in loading the overhead of the Zend framework if all you want to do is serve a static image and sit in your file system. All right, so we're going to say ZF create, and as you see over here, we have two options. Well, project. You can either tell it the name of your project, or you can let it ask you for the name of the project. So we're going to have an ask, just that way we can take care of both of those at the same time. So ZF create project. It's going to create a project in this folder, which is obviously this path. I could be anywhere, and as long as I say ZF create project, and then when I specify or when it asks me, if I give it the path, it'll put it there. So I navigated here just for demonstration purposes, so I didn't have to do a whole lot of typing. But you could have been at C, said create project, and as long as you said C:/users jan desktop, blah, 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 that's where it's going to put it. So you don't have to move around to match what you want to do. It's smart. I'm just trying to save myself from typing in the command prompt I'm not familiar with.
Can you specify the folder you want to put in if you're just like at the root, you want to say ZF create project?
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
This path?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. So we're going to leave the name off.
One other question about that. One other question about the create project, following up here. If you include the path, does it create all of the subfolders?
Yep. Yes, it will.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, it will. It'll take care of all that. Yes, it will. So it wants to know a value for path, is what it's going to ask you. In this particular case, we're already where we want to be, so I'm just going to write a folder name. So it says, oh, well, here I am. Or you type in anything you want. So what do we want our project called? I don't care one way or the other. First person.
Demo.
Demo works. There we go. Oops. Almost didn't get it. There you go. We're done with leave. That was it right there.
That was easy.
All right, so now if we go look at our structure over here, here's my sites. Notice mine, this is my path. There's our demo folder. So I'm actually going to show it to you in an editor because it's so much prettier. Give me a second here. Oh, come on. What do I want? Here we go. Okay, I cannot see the little gray. Because my screen's tilted. It's easier to do this. There's our demo. Application, library, public tests, and we have the ZF project XML file. Zend Tool Framework uses that file. Remember when we talked about the serializing of the project, or excuse me, of the profile? That's where it keeps track of everything. How do I know where things go? Where's, all that type of stuff. It all sits right there. Application, library, public, and text. So if we start, spreading these out, you notice it automatically out of the box starts creating tests for you also. So I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. I'm pretty sure you were talking about test-driven design and unit testing. Hey, look at that. Right out of the box. I have not dug into these to attest to how great they are. And of course, with all tests, again, they're just a basic starting point. You still got to add all your own, test parameters, etc. But the fact that you can, in a matter of, let's say an hour the first time, do this and have unit tests? How many know what unit tests are? How many have used them? For those of you that don't know, just be excited with this. This is good. This is setting you up for something you're eventually going to get around to.
Like sleep.
Exactly. So anyway, it puts all this stuff in there. Remember that graphic we looked at, like the fourth slide in? Mm-hmm. And you go, I don't want to have to create that. Ta-da! Here you go. And then we're going to learn how to do our own providers so we can add our own stuff, all that type of stuff. That's where we're heading with this thing. But out of the box, there you go. There's those files that we talked about. There's the public. I'll just open the htaccess file since you were asking about it back there. Out of the box, it sets an environment variable. development by default. And then there's conditional code inside of Zend Framework that says, hey, if I'm development, then I'm going to turn error recording on, but if I'm production, I'm going to turn it off. If I'm development, I'm going to have my error handler work a certain way, that kind of stuff. You can dig through all this code. I'm not going to bore you with it. I got to use something to feel excited about finding out on your own. And then, again, it just says, hey, here we go. Route everything. Boom. Now, of course, you can customize that. Where we're heading is, well, what if you want this to be different when you do an application? And you can do that, et cetera, et cetera. So, that was creating a project. I mean, right there. There's our demo website. Now, let's go back to here. Now that we have a project, there are two more commands we can run. We can show our project, and we can show our profile. So let's take a look at those real quick. Drink your coffee, or any other favorite beverage. See, isn't it helpful? Had I read that the first time, I would have put it on the slide. So this presentation, if you caught on, some of it is tempered with, that's actually in my notes. Anybody know what?
You're going to change it to the site directory.
We're not in our project. If I had a gold star, I'd give you one, Tish. We're going to go in the
Already
demo.
went through this pain.
Oh, you can have a star. Now, show project and show profile. This is more for advanced development. Again, I'm just showing you it's another way to, hey, you want to start playing around. As a developer, as you start, okay, yeah, there we go. So that's just telling us where our project is. It's just telling us information about the project, which out of the box, it doesn't have a whole lot of metadata. Remember that term? This is all it knows. If we say, show me my profile, remember that profile resource that can handle the serialization, the profile that handles the serialization of it? That's what we're about to see here. Looks an awful lot like our project tree if we go back to our IDE, doesn't it?
Yep.
That's what's in that ZF project.xml file. This is what keeps track of that resource tree, where the Zend tool project profile sits at the top node of that resource tree. If you remember back to those slides from a while ago. Trust me, if you don't, it's okay. I've only been over this many, many times, so I don't normally have all these intricacies memorized. But anyway, there you go. Again, this is more of a developer tool. As you start writing providers, you start wanting to play with this, make sure things wrote, your project was saved the way you expected, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want you to have exposure, because you're going to see these terms as you're reading it, and you're like, what the heck is that? Is it something I should care about? Yeah, not really. It's nice to look at. It's great, a little demo, no user odds, but it's all right. Okay. So, let's actually look at the application in the browser then. So, let me go back here. I have some handy little shortcuts here. This is my Apache config file, because remember, we just installed an application on our web server. Don't be confused, it's all on the same physical machine at the moment, but web server. We're going to go and create a new virtual host entry. We're going to call it demo, because might as well just stick with it. We're going to set this to demo. All that look good to everybody? This is the absolute bare minimum virtual host, because again, I didn't want to convolute the waters. We're looking for any name that comes in on port 80. If the server name is demo.lamp, that's the URL we're going to use, then load that directory. And actually, I did just catch an error. That's how your Zend Framework applications get bootstrapped, is you have to route it to the public folder. That's where your index, that PHP file is that does all of the front controller startup and bootstrapping process. All right, so that part's good. So let's go restart Apache. Because if you make a change to Apache configuration, you have to restart the server in order to have all those configurations in local memory. And that's what you're hoping for. A nice little green and everything's fine, so we're all good there. So we're going to go ahead and close that. Now, we're also going to do a little trick. How many of you know about the host file on a machine. Okay. What you get is, you have a domain name, not messenger.com. But right now, we're not setting up domain names and routing them and putting them on a server. Even if we had a publicly addressable URL, how am I going to get it to this laptop sitting in room 3008? And you just can't do it. Unix and Windows have the ability to look at a host file first and say, look at what was asked to be gone to, see if I have an entry. If I do, use it, and don't go out to the world's DNS. If you don't have an entry for it, then go out and look and see where it really exists outside in the wild. So localhost has an IP address of 127.0.0.1. You learn all kinds of things in there, right? So, demo.lamp. So I've now told Windows, when I type in demo.lamp, oh, no, I'm good. That's McAfee saying, you're changing an important file.
You missed a period in your
Oh,
IP address.
all right, thank you. Just making sure you guys are paying attention. Okay. So now when I type demo.lamp in my browser, it's going to say, go to this IP address. I told Apache to look for any requests coming in on this IP address. Look for this, because we had that named host, and go to where it's supposed to go. So now, when we go to here, I should already Firefox. Oh, now it's probably going to ask about that. Okay. What you expected? Yeah, me neither. I don't expect you to get the answer, but any quick thoughts as to what might be wrong? There's only one thing wrong, and it's not wrong per se.
You turned off your errors?
No. Well,
you don't have a controller.
yeah. Remember when we talked about Zend Framework liking to be on the include path? By default, when you create a Zend Framework application using the Zend tool, it assumes Zend Framework is on the include path. It can't find Zend tool because I don't have it on the include path. So, if you had, in those previous slides, if you chose to put it on the include path, it would work and it would come up just as you would expect. If, however, you decide to play around with some of the fancier configuration and have more customization, like I prefer, we simply have to tell it where to find it. And again, this is back to how we prefer to run them at our location, because we don't like it on the include path. We like being able to pick, etc. So, all we have to do is when it's setting the include path here,
Which file was that?
ta-da! That is interesting. It didn't load the images though. Normally there's some color. Oh. Good old Vista. That file was the index.php file, which is in the public folder. Because in our virtual host directive, we told it to go to the public folder and look. Apache has an additional configuration that says index.php is the first file that should be loaded, and Zend Framework application then has this content in it that defines application paths, include paths, calls Zend application. Remember we talked about that? Does a few other things from the configuration, and then it begins the bootstrap process. This is how a Zend Framework application gets started on every request. So again, it's slightly off the path, but it depends on which path you followed earlier. I'm covering both of them. So this is our application. Although I really don't know why I know why. I don't have internet connection. Apparently, out of the box, see, I'm always on. Out of the box, they're referencing images on their server as part of their sample app. They didn't include them as part of the bundle. No big deal. Usually this looks pretty. It's got like a nice blue, background, the Zend Framework logo.
Also tells them that you're running it.
There you go, right there. Somebody's getting a nickel.
That counter just clicked one more time.
Exactly. Okay. Any questions about that?
You said of the need for getting different applications running under different versions. When you after the demo, when you download it, that pay for Do you have to pay every time you get it?
Absolutely free.
Okay.
100% free. It's open source, community driven, community offered, etc. I've downloaded it. I can't tell you how many times.
If you suffered with it for a while, you're at $15.
I am the biggest Zend Framework fanboy, but it is not without its difficulties. I will be honest with you. It's a little frustrating.
Jeremy, do you contribute?
I gotta take off early, sorry. Greg.
Oh, no problem, dude.
Thanks for coming.
I have my contributor license signed with Zend Framework, and I haven't found the time to contribute as I want to. My resolution for 2010 is I will absolutely contribute something, and I was actually architecting 2 different ideas today. How soon we're going to get there, I have no idea. I spent a ton of time putting this presentation together, for example, et cetera, et cetera. There's always something. But I have my contributor's license, but I have not yet. But 2010, there's another 11 months, so this will be the year.
I have a deployment. After when you finish your work at development and all that, if you want to deploy it to a site, for example, do you have to have Zend Framework on the host?
Yes. You cannot write a Zend Framework application and then end up with a finished that doesn't have Zend Framework. It's not compiled. So you have to, all your code relies on Zend Framework existing. So when you put something on production, it has to be there also. It is a library. It's definitely a library. And it's interesting because you can write code that references the library using the library. Again, it's that whole MC Escher thing. It's a weird concept, but you have to have it distributed out to wherever you're going, or it will not. All right, so that was creating a project. So we have controllers, we have actions, and we have views. That's the main part of an MC application. So we're going to blow through these real quick so we get to some really fun stuff, how we can create these. So let's go back to our slides for a moment. All right, we're going to create a controller. A controller is an endpoint. If I want to go to demo.lamp/contact, ultimately that's telling Zend Framework that, hey, I'm trying to go to a resource called contact. I'm going to have an associated contact controller that's going to do stuff. It's going to prepare the view. It's maybe going to go get some business logic from our models. So you need these controllers. So if I want, again, I can create a controller. I can ask for the name, or I can provide the name. So we're just going to real quick go in here. I'll walk you through these real quick. I'm going to say ZF create controller, and let's say it's contact. So again, if we come over here real quick, so that way we can show you the before and after. Go to my public folder, application. Here's my controllers. Notice out of the box I have my index and my error controller. I'm about to create my contact controller.
Get a label.
And yeah. And you will now notice, a little hard to kind of sort it. It created a controller at this really long location, and it's telling you that it was in demo, applications, or, well, you can't really see it. That's not going to work right now. Application controllers, contact controller. What to take away from this is not only did it create your controller for you, it also created your index action inside the controller, and it also created a view script folder and a view script file. A controller does you no good in the standard out-of-the-box MVC structure. Controller does you no good without associated view scripts. So not only did it create the controller, it created an index action in front of the controller, or in the controller for you, which you need. It also created the view script directories and the actual view script that puts it all together.
And
So
the
now,
index action is actually the default, right?
correct, the index action is the default, so you don't have to type it in. So if we go to contact, this is our view script for controller contact and the script action name index, out of the box. As Tish just said, if we would have went to here, we get the exact same thing, because index is just the default. You don't have to type it, but there has to be an index action in your controller. And I know we're marrying a little bit of Zend Framework, talking here, but since a lot of you aren't as familiar with it, I'm trying to give you a little bit of knowledge. So you see these terms again when you read the manual, it makes sense.
That also created the error controller also for contact, correct?
No, because it uses a system default error that all errors get thrown out to this application-wide error controller.
Okay.
I'll double check here because I could certainly be wrong if you stare at code long enough. If we refresh this, now we have the content controller. Yeah, there is no corresponding error controller.
Okay.
But again, Zend tool, write your own providers. If that's how you want your application to work, right away. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to skip the next part. Don't worry, it's nothing too crazy. I just thought we can get on to some other stuff because I want to be mindful of the time. If you want to create a controller action, you can say create action name and then the controller name. So let's say we wanted to say email is your action inside a controller. So I can say ZF create action email contact, and inside the contact controller is going to create an email action, and it's going to create the corresponding view scripts to go with that action. If you leave any of it off, it throws a fatal error. This is just more for people who really care about this stuff. I was trying to distill what's in the manual down to digestible chunks. Now you can create view scripts by themselves. If you go ZF create view, you give it contact, and then you say email template, it's only going to create the view script. Because you're at the end of that branch. You're at controller and actions and views. If we're now creating views, it has no context in which to say, oh, well, if I wanted this, you needed that. If I wanted that, you needed these. But when you're down here, that's all you're going to get. So don't expect to create an action and have it cascade up and go, well, where's my corresponding, don't expect to create a view and then expect to look into your controller and go, where's my corresponding action? Because it's not going to exist. You play around, you get the hang of it. As you learn more about Zend Framework, this will make absolute perfect sense to you, I promise. This is actually easier than it sounds, but it's just something to keep in mind. Because again, that top-down tree view. Look at that. End of another section. All right. So that's the out-of-the-box of Zend tool, creating your controllers, your views, and your actions, which is the majority of your stuff.
Question.
Yes.
The views is not like a database view, just a navigation.
Correct. It's a representation of your output. Most normally, and out of the box with Zend tool, is going to be HTML. But the view idea in MVC, it could be JSON data, it could be an XML RSS feed, it could be HTML, it could be anything you want. All right, extending Zend tool. We talked about this a little bit before. Remember, the Zend tool framework is going to look on the include path for any file that ends in manifest.php or provider.php. So it was all well and good. We had ZF create controller, ZF create action, ZF create view. What if I want my own thing? Here you go. This is how you can extend it. Now we're moving into a little bit more advanced. What you're going to see isn't advanced, but the idea behind it, you're like, holy cow, I barely learned how to use what came with it. Now we're talking about extending it? But the tool is going to quickly run the course of what's useful. Because unless you're writing it exactly like they do, you really want to extend it. So that's what this gets into. All right, some naming rules. Basically, if the last part of your class name is split by an underscore is used for the provider name, such as my provider hello. So once it's found those files, what are your providers going to be named in Zend tool? When you see them there, when we have the project providers in that black and white help text, what's it going to be called? If you have a file called my provider hello, it's going to be called the hello provider. You can also, inside the provider, give it its own name. So regardless of how you named the file, you can say, this is how I want you to be exposed. And then if neither of those, there's another rule here, blah, 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 blah. You can go back and knock yourself out with those. I'm not going to bore you. You'll see it with the code. That's how I learned the best anyway. Does not follow symlinks. So do not expect to put all your providers somewhere and then have a symlink to them and then try to get Zend tool to see them. It will laugh at you. That isn't going to change. But there's some other stuff that they're coming out with that will be better than that anyway. So just accept it for what it is and just know it. Okay, so what does a custom provider look like? I have separate notes on this, so I'll make sure I don't forget anything. Okay. There's a custom provider. We're calling it My Provider, slide 54. The reason for that is because when you download these slides and the demos, this happens to be slide 54, so you can put the two together. I could call it anything I want. I picked this naming convention to go with this presentation. So I don't want you to think, that's what you have to call these or anything like that. This has to do with presentation. I'm going to implement the Zend Tool Framework Provider interface. Does that class look familiar way back in the beginning? Okay. I'm going to create a function called say, and I'm going to echo this out. So let's go find it. Now, remember, Zend Tool Framework looks for your custom providers on the include path. So I don't have my, I didn't modify my include path. I use that set command. So in here, I am going to use the Zend Tool include path prepend to tell it where to go find my custom providers, because again, I want that flexibility and showing off one of those environment variables. So I'm going to just run that. Hey, look at that. If I run set, you're going to see somewhere in here. There it is. Zend Tool include path prepend the value blah blah blah. So you know it's set. You know you're good to go. And I'm going to clear all of that up. Okay. I am going to go to my folder, because this is my custom library. Okay. Well, I can do it now. All right, so I have these called hidden at the moment, because remember, Zend Tool Framework looks for files and in provider. I didn't want to all of a sudden expose all these to you. So this is truly just for demo purposes. When you download the slides or the files, they're already going to be named what they're supposed to be named. This was truly to facilitate my use. Remember all the other times when we ran the ZF command? I have one in my office. Whenever Coach ran. All right. This is the out-of-the-box project provider. That's the only providers that are there at the moment. And then all this other stuff that, we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, if I delete this, so that way I have a provider now, because remember it ends in the provider name. And now if I run this, we have a new provider. Let's see what it does. What do we think it's going to do?
Hello, DFW.
After things. Hey! There you go.
You did use foobar though, man.
I know. So, that is our custom provider. That's great, but it's still not quite perfect. We're able to see it. Zend Tool Framework saw it. We were able to execute it all as well. But all we were doing before was implementing the interface. It isn't a true provider in the sense that it doesn't have all the capabilities a provider can offer. To get that, we should also extend the Zend Tool Project Provider abstract, as well as implement this. And we'll talk about what all those things go. And I'm probably going to skip the live coding because of time. You can go and play with them. All the files are there. They're identical. We'll walk through. I'll just show it to you. So if we change our class to be this, and slide 55 looks like this, and we extend in this, and now we still say, because we're extending the Zend Tool Project Provider abstract, we have the ability to access the registry. Remember I was talking about that a while ago? And we can get the response object. Now we can append content. It's going to do the same thing on the screen, but this is more correct. Because at the moment, we're using the command line interface. If I echo or print something, it'll show up in the command line interface, and you won't be none the wiser. But if you are accessing this provider via a web interface, echo and print is not what you want, because you might want it rendered in an iframe or treated differently. Every client is different. So if you instead actually use the Zend tool framework capabilities to append content to the response object that you can get as a resource out of the registry, now all of the implementations, Zend tool project, and anything else that you envision you want to do can respond correctly. This is object-oriented programming at its purest. You don't echo, you don't print, you make everything extensible. So that was a subtle difference here between these two slides, is the extension of this provider abstract, which starts affording us the capability to truly act as a provider now. So remember we talked about you could, as one of the second rules, if you don't like the way you named your file, you didn't want to worry about how you named your file, you want to provide a custom name. This is just like the other slide. It still says say, but we're going to provide a function called getName. Then if we ran the ZF help, instead of seeing slide 56 as our provider, we're going to see DFW lamp underscore slide 56. Because it's saying override what you think the name should be by using the getName, which is provided as capability by extending, you see where we're going with this. All right. Manifests. Manifests keep track of everything like we talked about earlier. It allows you to attach context and metadata and all kinds of other stuff that we'll touch on in a little bit. For the purpose of this, it's great because maybe I don't want all of my providers to be on the include path. Maybe I have providers all over the place, and I don't want to have to manage them with file names and include paths and all that kind of stuff. I just want to expose a single manifest and use the manifest to tell Zend Tool Project where my providers are at. My manifest, it implements the Zend Tool Framework manifest provider manifestable. There's a function called getProviders that Zend Tool Project is going to call. I am going to require the file so I can then return an instance of that object. As a side note, you might be going, well, what the heck, would they have an autoloader? I have yet to figure out why I have to require the file and it can't just load it using the Zend Framework autoloader. It does not like resolving that path unless you put that in there. I gave up. It'll get fixed at some point or when I have more time to dig into it.
And I had used the same thing.
It's one of those things. If you're like me, 2 hours into it, you're cursing up a storm going, what the hell? Because if you understand Zend Framework and Zend Framework loading and every other object works that way, you're going to start by not putting that line in. You're going to look at this example and go, what was that idiot thinking? You don't need that. You're going to take it out. You have to have it for this. I don't know why. You've been warned. You can return a bunch of these. So again, when we run ZF help, you can have my provider A, my provider B, C, and D. And here you just return new my provider A, my provider B, C, D, E. Whatever you have here, it lets you, direct traffic. That's all a manifest in this context is doing. There's other things we'll talk about. All right, so some more provider stuff. And I'm sorry we're skipping through the live examples, but again, I want to watch the time. Okay. You can pass in a parameter to your provider. Parameter, an argument. So I could say, it's going to be called slide 60 because I don't have a name, a get name overriding it. It's called slide 60, so that's what it's going to be exposed at. I could say ZF say slide 60. I can also pass in a name. So if I just call it 60, it's going to say Jeremy is in attendance. Because Jeremy is the default value of name, and name's being used here, and I didn't pass anything in to override it. These are methods, these are functions. It's normal PHP. There's nothing fancy about it. You don't have to think a different way. If I said ZF say slide 60 Jason, it's going to say Jason is in attendance. Or I could also go -- name. Again, if you're used to command line arguments, you can pass them in that way. All of these will achieve the same thing. You have the ability to pass in variables. That's what we're going for in this slide. What if you want to ask the user for input? Name's going to be blank. I'm going to set name equal to going to the registry to get a resource. I'm going to say get my client. Again, how the web interface client that doesn't exist yet might implement this is different than how the command line interface might implement it. You don't know how they're going to ask on a web page. Prompt for an interactive input. What do you want it to say at the command line? Then we're going to say, get the content of that name and say blah, 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 blah. So if you ran this and you said, ZF ask, slide 61, it's going to prompt up on the screen, what is your name? What you type there, it's then going to say, Jeremy says hello, DFW Apache Land. Pretendability. Maybe you want to see what your provider is going to do without actually doing it. Maybe you have a provider that says delete the entire file structure. I'm gutsy, why not? Maybe you want to see what it's going to delete without actually deleting it. So there's this concept of pretendability. You implement an additional interface, Zend Framework Provider Pretendable. That gives you the ability to get the request and see if it is pretend. So if you called this with a -- pretend, this code's going to come through here and go, oh, I'm this, do that instead. I would have said hello. If I just called it with ZF say, I'm not pretend, therefore I'm here, so actually do what I was going to do. Verbose, same concept. If you want to have a section where you want to have more output or less output, you can use the verbose argument to control that within your provider. And the same thing with debug. So these are built-in capabilities. You can combine them. But you didn't see that. So in this particular case, I'll just give you a quick example. We said, okay, here's my file location. Logically, this is not obviously, I skipped many conceptual thoughts here. File location. If you're a pretend, I would have created the file. And then I would have went down here, and if debug was also on, I would have then put a line break and said, here's my debug info. If I am not pretend, I would have come here. If I wanted to be verbose, I would have said file was successfully created. Otherwise, I'm just going to say file created. So if I just pass in, if I pass in nothing, all I'm going to get, if I only call say, what am I going to get?
File created.
File created, exactly. If I pass in nothing but debug, I'm going to get file created and debug, et cetera, you get the idea. Okay. End of that section. I've only got 3 sheets left.
That was easy.
Yeah, it was easy, right? I mean, look at it.
Piece of cake.
All right.
I didn't even break out in a sweat.
About 11 o'clock tonight.
Get home, there's nothing worse.
I will give you my business cards and my email address, but I will not give you my phone number.
Smart guy.
All right. What if you want to customize the client? And this stuff we're really going to be able to just blow right through. All right. Remember we talked a little bit before about being able to do custom profiling and configuration directives and all that kind of stuff. Home directory, local storage, user configuration, you can specify all of these types of things. You can say, well, if I have a custom profile that I want, and I say create controller, it's supposed to act this way. Where's the template that it's supposed to get it from? Hey, if local storage in my home directory, what kind of options should it have? That's the concept here. I don't have examples of it because I ran into some difficulties. Plus 1.9 wasn't the greatest of this stuff. This was extremely fuzzy. And 1.10 fixed a lot of this. So I had to choose between continuing to beat my head against the wall to show you something that kind of sort of worked, or just direct you to 1.10 and hope you invite me back maybe in a few months once we learn 1.10 again. That's the end of that section.
Cool.
All right, putting our providers to work. What can we actually do with them? And we talked about mechanics within them, but what do you do with providers? So there's something you can do which is load profile and store profile. Remember again when we said show our profile and it showed that tree and it's saved in that the ZF project.xml, profile.xml file. It doesn't do us a whole lot of good just open up a project or a provider and say, oh, I got this file, hey, look at that neat. You're actually, hopefully with your provider, modifying the structure of your project. So somewhere in your code, prior to doing what you really want your provider to do, you're going to load your profile. So it knows stuff about it. You're going to modify it, and then you're going to store that profile back. You're going to keep ZenTool in the loop on what your code's actually doing. Context is another concept in here where, again, hey, when we say get our profile, we're going to load it. Then my models directory, I want to search for my models directory. In the manifest, we can give it context and metadata. We can say, hey, when I want to expose this provider in my manifest, there's also certain values I want to expose. One of them could be, let's say, in this example, a models directory. So I can search my metadata for this value. I could search my profile for that metadata and set my models directory equal to that value. Then when I create a new resource, I can get the context, tell it that I'm supposed to be model file, etc. And again, I know you're like, what? We're doing so great, and now he's kind of talking gibberish. This got better in 110. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time teaching you something you're not going to be using this way. Concept's identical, but it works in 110. The Zend code generator. I don't know if you can read this very well. Zend tool code generator allows you to create files, like PHP files. So let's say you wanted to create a provider that would read your database, look at all the tables, and then create the DB abstract files for your models. So it would have all the fields and the types, and it creates setters and getters and do all that stuff for you. I mean, this is the idea behind creating a project on the fly. So Zend tool, here's my provider file. I'm extending this abstract. I can create a new Zend code generator PHP class. I passed in the name. For these properties, I'm saying if you passed me in 4 field values out of your database, A, B, C, and D, I'm creating a file that's going to have a protected method. Where's the method at? Protected method whose name is _A. Remember, you're thinking you're writing a class. Then I'm going to create a method called setA. And this is the body of that method. This _A is equal to A. And then I'm going to create another method called getA, which is going to return this _A. And I'm going to keep going through a loop, and then I'm going to return this. So somewhere in my code, elsewhere, I said, create a file, write the file. Here's an example of it actually creating code for you on the fly. So you open your profile, you get some information, say what's the name of the file I want, or where am I going to be storing it, go to my database, get the stuff, create getters and setters right here, return that and write it to this location, save that back to my profile, and I'm done. I have a DB table provider. Create my abstracts for me. Point it to a data source, automatically do it. Now, a DB abstract provider is actually built into 110. You don't have to write your own. But this is a great, just to look at it and go, I could do something with this. It can also integrate with Zend application. You load your profile. Hey, I want to get my config path for my application. Using, I'm going to skip that. Okay, the Zend application, you can create an instance of it. You can tell it to go to your config file where you can get the location coming off of your manifest metadata. And then you can run, you can bootstrap your database connection right here because you've already said, hey, go use that config, use the built-in ZendDB that's part of my application already, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's something to walk away with and be able to go play with it. These are standalone, just examples. They don't integrate with anything, but again, they're just more great, concept. And again, some more additional resources. I strongly recommend you look at those. So where do we go from here? I'm going to hit it right up. All right, known plans. I am good. Model provider is in 110. There's one in 1.9. You can just all laugh at me now. I haven't played with it, but from what I know, I talked to Ralph Schindler, the guy that writes this, and that's supposed to be much, much better. Does that DB, your DB table provider, your adapter configuration. It also has form providers, which sound ridiculously promising, but so does Zend Form. If there's any component inside of Zend Framework that will really annoy you, it's Zend Form, because it's so powerful. Once you get the hang of it, you're like, holy cow, this is like just absolutely amazing. But when you first read it, you go, okay, it might as well be written in Greek because it makes no sense. So having a provider to do it, that's got a lot of promise. Layout enabling and creation, improved module provider, custom profiling for your own code. This is how I want it to work, that kind of thing. Okay. Web interface is promised. There's no guarantee as to what version, but they want to have a web interface out of the box, so you don't have to write your own. Better documentation. They know that a lot of these features are there, but there's no documentation for them, so it's a stated goal. And they have hopes for, one of the things Ralph Schindler was talking about when I was talking with him last week about where this was heading, is creating, remember we have Zend Tool project? This would be Zend Tool Apache config, and it'll let you maintain and build and do things with your Apache configuration. So that's just one of the things that they're talking about. So using it for your own needs. You don't have to use it for just a project. Again, that Apache idea. If you have something completely, it doesn't have to be a website. It doesn't have to be a project. If you want to create anything, this is a scaffolding environment to rapid application development. You can use it to build anything. You write your providers, and then you consume your providers. The sky is truly the limit. It's anything you need it to do. What we're doing at Spear 1 is we're having a branch in Subversion that keeps track of our registration application. We as developers can make contributions to it, so we always have the latest version of it. We do an SVN export to our custom directory for Zenful to find, and then we expose our providers that go with it, and then we can say create new, reg with 2 pages, create this with that, create, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually when we put the web interface on top of that, our account managers should be able to go and create these websites for themselves. Because when they click the button, there should be a script that does the Subversion export. It puts it where it needs to go. All the providers are exposed. They click the buttons, they hit the thing, and oh, look at that, we installed a website. Because our requirements are so fine-tuned, we can do something like that. So that's how we at Spear 1 are beginning to use it. We are not there yet, but that's what we're doing with it. Okay, public service announcement. What can you do to help Zentool get better? Because, hey, Zentool and Zend Framework need some help. I mean, they do. Play with it and use it. I'm up here talking to you because I beat my head against the wall a day before you did. Well, maybe not literally a day, but you did. Submit bugs and feature requests. Here's a URL, the actual Zentool component. You can also see everything else that's inside the Zend Framework, but this is where the Zentool lives. Get involved in the community. Write a blog post. Visit ZF Talk and irc.freedom.net. You'll find a lot of developers. There's also an actual contributors room as well, if you're interested in that. If you become a contributor, which all it takes is you got to just sign a contributor license agreement. You can actually fix some of the bugs, implement new features, improve documentation, which I highly, highly recommend. And again, additional resources. And that's it.
Bravo. Wow. That's incredible.